All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Kia ora. Welcome to the Low Code Plugins VRT. Sarah, thanks so much for having me on. I am thrilled to present to you all today. If you were at last week's Scottish Power Platform group, the content's going to be largely the same, but there is some really cool new stuff that I came across this week that we'll delve into towards the end of the demo. So I'm Nathan Rose. I am a lead consultant at Capgemini here in beautiful Auckland. Well, it's actually very cold Auckland at the moment. It's so cold we actually had frost, which is really rare for us. I am a Microsoft MVP in business applications. I've kind of become the PowerFx guy over the last couple of years, and I am super passionate about empowering you all with the Power Platform. So we're going to be going through low code plugins and the Dataverse Accelerator app today. I love for these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So if at any point in time you have a question, a comment, something you don't understand, something you don't agree with, come off mute and let's talk about it, or pop your question in the chat. Sarah, I don't have ready access to the chat while I'm presenting, so if you could just keep an eye on it. If there's a question in there that we need to talk about, just let me know and we can discuss. Okay, quick overview of our time together today. So we'll take a look at what PowerFx is, where you can use it. We'll then get into an overview of low-code plugins, get hands-on with them, and then we'll wrap up with when you should use them versus their traditional peers, random tips and tricks, and some Q&A. All right, well, let's dive into it because I've got a lot of stuff to cover, and we were kind of bang on an hour last week, so I want to make sure that we don't go over today. Okay, what is PowerFx? It is Microsoft's low-code formula-based language that's used to customize the Power Platform, and the idea is that it centers around human-friendly commands that pretty much work like Excel. So we've got Charles mentioned last week, there's about 1 billion to 1.5 billion Excel users worldwide, and PowerFx is designed to pretty much be able to be picked up and used by them. And in fact, there's many cases where you can copy and paste Excel into a PowerFx environment in the Power Platform, and it just works. It is strong typed, functional, and declarative, and we'll get into that in a second. If that doesn't quite make sense, that's okay, but we'll dive into it because that is really, really key to what makes PowerFx so special. Now, where can you use it? So it started life in Canvas apps. So if you've worked with Canvas apps before, then you've used PowerFx. It then made its way into custom pages and modern commands across the Power Platform. And it's now moved from apps into Dataverse. So a couple years ago, we got calculated columns in Dataverse. And then about a year ago at the Build conference, we got low-code plugins, which we'll be going into today. It then went into the CLI. We'll get into a little bit of that towards the end. And then we've got preview features in Power Automate Desktop and Copilot Studio. So PowerFx is just absolutely proliferating across the Power Platform as it lets us do some pretty cool stuff in a low-code way. All right, but what is strong typed and why does this matter? So what they've done is they've put in guardrails and training wheels at the head end to ensure that potential issues are addressed during development and so that you don't discover them at runtime. So a classic example would be trying to add a string field and a number field together. If you're using a more traditional, weaker typed language, as long as your syntax is correct, the language is going to let you compile that code and run it, but you're not going to get an issue or not know that you have an issue until runtime. And depending on the language you're using, it's either going to throw an error and say, I don't know what you want to do, or it's going to assume that you wanted to concatenate those and mash those columns together. Whereas PowerFx is going to say, those are two different data types. I don't know what you want me to do. So you can see here in the screenshot, if we try to take a number and a string, it's going to say, I don't know how to do that. If we try to add them together here, it says, I need this converted to a number. I can't convert this to a number. So you get the idea that we've put these guardrails in at the head end. So this makes life a lot easier for a maker, for someone who is perhaps a citizen dev, but it also makes life easier for um, more professional developers as well, because it gets these issues out at the head end. But what about declarative? What is that, and what does it mean? So there's a great video from April Dunham on YouTube about comparing this to a chef using a recipe. I'm more of a McDonald's guy, and so an imperative language, which would be the opposite of this, your more traditional programming languages, you not just say what you want, but you give it the steps for how to get there. So in the case of, if I wanted a Big Mac, I would, we go through the jingle: 2 beef patties, special sauce and cheese, all on a sesame seed bun, gets me to a Big Mac in more traditional programming. Whereas in PowerFx, I roll up to the drive-through and I say, "I'd like a Big Mac, please," and I move on. So that's what makes PowerFx so special, is I just tell it what I want it to do, add these numbers, mash this text together, those types of things, and it just does it. I don't have to specify how I want it to do it. So that's strong typed and declarative, and those are some really special features of PowerFX that make it unique and make it something that is quite friendly for someone who's not been a developer before to pick it up and start working with it. Okay, but you might be asking, what about our good mate Power Automate? Because we've had Power Automate for quite some time. It does some great things for us. And before low-code plugins came out, I was of the opinion that, gee, are we ever going to need plugins again? Because, Power Automate pretty much does everything we want. And the key phrase here is synchronous. So Power Automate runs asynchronous. So it runs kind of near real time, but it doesn't run real time, which means you could trigger a process, have some other updates to a record happen before Power Automate actually runs and does what it's going to do with that record. Whereas with a synchronous process, as soon as the process is triggered, that record is locked and you can't do any updates to it until that process is finished running. So this is generally a requirement if you're working in the financial or the legal world, where you need that record absolutely locked down until when a process is triggered until it's finished running. So that's the big difference between when you would use a plugin or Power Automate. There's a few other differences. Plugins let us control when the logic fires, either before or after saving to Dataverse, and we'll get into that in a second. You are limited to that 2-minute timeout in Dataverse. At any time you have requirements that exceed Power Automate, plugin is a good choice. Power Automate is great when you need to do some heavy-duty looping or processing or anything that would exceed that 2-minute timeout in Dataverse. Plugins don't let you loop at the moment, or at least I haven't figured out how to do it. So Power Automate is going to be your friend for that. Power Automate is great when you don't have pro devs available to build plugins, or you have a process that exceeds what PowerFX is capable of. And this is a bit of a controversial one, especially with some of the new features that we'll get into in a bit. I personally believe that Power Automate has better process traceability as compared to plugins, because you get that detailed view step by step for here's what triggered it, here's what went in, here's what came out, here's what the error is. So my personal view is that Power Automate gives you a bit better traceability than plugins, but open to other views on that. And when we do get into some of the new features, there is some really cool traceability that's come into low-code plugins. All right, so we'll move on to the plugin execution pipeline. Now, if you're a pro dev, this will be very familiar to you, but if you are more of a functional, a business user, or a citizen dev, this will be a new concept, but it is really key to understand in the plugin world. So plugins follow a 4-step execution pipeline in Dataverse. So the 4 steps are pre-validation, pre-operation, main operation, and post-operation. Pre-validation means that the plugin runs when you need to validate some data in terms of does it need to run at all. Pre-operation means that it runs before the save to Dataverse. The main operation is the actual save to Dataverse, and you're not allowed to run any plugin logic there. And then post operation is after the save to Dataverse. I did have a chat with a pro dev friend of mine who said that most plugins tend to run either pre or post operation. They don't use pre-validation very much. But your traditional plugins that you'd write in C# can run pre-validation or operation or post-operation. The low-code plugins can run pre-operation or post-operation. But you can put some pretty cool validation in using PowerFx, using if and switch and other statements like that. So I'd argue that you don't necessarily need to execute pre-validation. But that's the execution pipeline, kind of a key thing to get your head around if you're not familiar with it in terms of plugins. So then the low-code plugins are authored in the Dataverse Accelerator app. This is a new app that Microsoft released last year with low-code plugins. It's automatically installed in environments today. If you have an older environment and you'd like to get it, it's available on AppSource. But what you do is you author your plugin logic using PowerFx in the Dataverse Accelerator app. And then what happens in the background is they compile C# code, and then your plugin is available to consume in Dataverse, Power Apps, Power Automate, depending on the type of plugin that you've created. So that's where you author them. And then we've got two different types of low-code plugins. So there's instant and automated. And the best way to think about this would be to think Power Automate, and you fully understand the difference between instant and automated in the low-code plugin world. Instant is triggered by a user interacting with something in an app or by Power Automate, and automated is triggered by a Dataverse event. So that's the difference. The instant plugins can be global or table bound. You can declare input and output parameters for them, connect them to third-party connections and APIs, and they can also call cloud flows. They can call or be called by cloud flows, and we'll get into that in a bit. And then automated plugins, again, they're triggered by an event in Dataverse. These are the ones where you specify whether you want it to run pre or post operation. They are bound to a table, so when you create it, it's bound to the Dataverse table that triggers it. You can't declare input or output parameters with them. The best way to get around that would be to use the with expression. You can also connect them to third-party connections and APIs, and you can't directly interact with Power Automate with the automated plugins. You could trigger them by having you could trigger the Cloudflow by having the plugin trigger a Dataverse event that would call the Cloudflow. I have found that I get some weird errors when, generally speaking, I've forgotten that I have the flow or the plugin running, and I see some weird errors when they disagree. So I'd be careful doing that. All right. Now, in terms of the solution elements, so when you need to move these around between environments, these are the elements you're going to need to have in your solution. So there's a new table in Dataverse that you might notice called FX expression. This is what's going to hold your PowerFx expression, your YAML and JSON and dependencies. And then below that, for an instant plugin, what's actually being created is a custom API. That's what, so they call it a plugin. You could make an argument either way as to whether it is or isn't, but it's being called a plugin, and for the instant ones, it's actually creating a custom API, and then your custom API request and response parameters. In terms of if you do need to add this to a solution, the party trick is just to add the custom API and then the FX expression and the input and output parameters automatically get added to the solution. So that's the best way to do it. So that's what makes up the instant plugins. The automated plugins, this would definitely be a plugin in the traditional sense. So again, you've got the FX expression that holds your PowerFX expression and all those goodies. And then there is a traditional plugin step that will be in your solution. Now, when you dig behind the scenes in the XRM toolbox, there's an assembly called PowerFx Plex, and it's got a plugin called the PowerFx Evaluator. And when you dive into that, you'll see all of the automated plugins that you've created as plugin steps. So that's what it's actually doing behind the scenes. And so those are the elements that you need to add to your solution to move these things around between environments. All right, I think we've covered enough of the theory, so we are ready to get hands-on and start doing some really irresponsible stuff with plugins in the environment. They are before we do that, I'll be responsible. We'll give the disclaimer. They are still a preview feature. The awesome thing about preview features is we get to do some irresponsible things and work out what's possible before we walk it back to what's responsible when it is GA. But because it is a preview feature, this could change at any time without prior warning. And I'll show you why in a second. This is actually a thing. So you don't want to use PowerFx plugins in any non-dev or trial environment. So don't use them in prod or UAT or anything like that. I wouldn't incorporate them into any current solution design. We don't yet have a GA date for them. I suspect it's going to be soon. That's just a personal opinion, nothing official. But because we don't have a GA date, I'd be cautious about adding it into any current solution design. But by all means, use them in your dev trial environments, try them out with current requirements, see what they're capable of. All right, so real world example. This is why we're really careful with preview features. So last week, before the Scottish Power Platform user group, I was not going to test things, and I'm glad I took a look because they stopped supporting the set expression in low-code plugins, and I had pretty much all my plugins were broken because of that, and I had to go replace all these set expressions with patch. And so this is why we're super careful with these things, because they change all the time. Some of you might have seen the GitHub discussion over the weekend with Mike Stahl, who's one of the architects of PowerFx at Microsoft. They are thinking about reinstating set as a function in low-code plugins, but again, because it's a preview feature, these are the kinds of things that that can happen. So if this was prod, if you had this running in prod, you'd have a real problem. But again, because it's in a dev environment, it's it's just par for the course. All right. Here's what we'll cover off in the demo. So we will take a look at the Dataverse Accelerator app. We'll look at instant plugins, automated plugins. We'll have some fun with the command line interface and show that interacting with plugins. And then I'll show you the preview Dataverse Accelerator app that I just discovered yesterday. It is very cool. It's got some cool new features. And then we'll get into the AI functions. Fingers crossed I've got enough AI builder credit to get these to run. I've got one left, so we might get one run in. We'll see how it goes, but they are pretty cool. I do have some screenshots if it doesn't cooperate. So let me pop out of presentation and bring up my browser. Just grab a quick drink of water. All right. So this is the Dataverse Accelerator app. This is the current version of it. And you'll see this in your list of apps in your organization. So if you come in to any of your environments, you'll see the Dataverse Accelerator app available. If you don't see it, it is available in AppSource. You can just add it into an older environment. But it basically lets you create your instant and automated plugins, and you can see that I've got my list of instant plugins and my list of automated plugins. So let's start off with the instant ones, and let's go into. So this is one that we'll show you in just a second. So I was so excited when I created it, I misspelled invoice, but this is this plugin is triggered manually, so from a user interacting with an element in an app. And so I can take in some input parameters. So in this case, I take in the name of the order, the GUID of the order, and an amount, and then I have it go and do some. I have it go and create a sales invoice related to that order, and so that's what's happening here. So it uses collect to create. So if you're used to the Canvas app world where you use patch and defaults to create rows, and low-code plugins you use collect, and you just specify the table, and then you can specify the columns that you're updating. And what's really cool is I can relate it back to this order that I've triggered, or to this row that I've triggered it from. The other stuff I've got here, this is stuff that Keith and I were playing with a few weeks ago to test out execution time. And so I've still got that wrapped around it, and that's the output parameter. But you can add these. So in terms of your input parameters that you can declare, so you can use strings, integers, decimals, floats, Booleans, and entity reference. And then your output parameters can pretty much be all of those with the exception of entity reference. So you can't have that as a output parameter coming out of the plugin. So that's the pretty much how you put together an instant plugin. Come down here. We can't update this at the moment, but when you create them, you can specify whether it's global or bound to a table. And that just, what that means is, in terms of accessing it, can you only access it from a table, or can you access it across any table? You can choose the solution that it goes in, which is a pretty nifty feature. And then you can test these as well in the Dataverse Accelerator app as well. So I'm going to need to grab a GUID. So let me do that, and we'll quickly test that out, and then I'll show you how it works from a Canvas app. That, and go here. The Teams bar always seems to be right where I don't need it. All right. And so when I run this again, there we go. So I've noticed that the first few times when you do a test, it throws an error. I'm not entirely sure why, but it did show us a successful run. Now, this is not actually creating a row in Dataverse. It did that a few months ago. That was a bug. It doesn't do that anymore. So, but it will let you test to make sure that your plugin logic is correct, and it'll run. So then once you've got that created, if we go over here to our Canvas app, so sorry, this is another one that I created. This is actually using a connection. I'll just show you that one real quick, and then we'll go ahead and run it. Where are we? So this is one that just uses a custom connector and grabs a piece of random trivia and then gives us that as the output parameter. So I'll just go ahead and run this, and then I'll show you how that works. So just hold down the Alt key, and you can see this is our plugin. Why is it throwing errors? Come back here and let's give it a test. There we go. So it's not sure why it's failing in the app, but you can see this is what we were meant to have gotten in the app, is we just got a piece of random trivia. So try it again. There we go. Okay, so this is our come here. So this is our plugin, and it's just displaying the output here. Now you might be saying, why are we using a plugin for this? Because I'm in my Canvas apps, I'm pretty used to just using connections to do the exact same thing. And the difference again would be synchronous. So if you need this to be a synchronous operation, meaning when we've triggered this, the row can't be updated until that process is finished running, then that would be the use case for using a plugin as opposed to just a connection in your Canvas app. A couple more things about instant plugins that are pretty cool is, as I just showed you, you can use third-party connections with them, and so you'll see that here. And so all of your connections in your Power Platform environment are available to you, and all you do is just click on it, and it'll show you the different actions, and you just copy it like this. I'm going to just come down here and paste it in, and then you can start working with it from there, and it'll tell you what it's expecting to see in the IntelliSense. This generally does. Unfortunately, it's not cooperating today. So one thing that I found is really helpful is to use a Canvas app to get a feel for what the connectors are looking for, because the IntelliSense in here doesn't always tell you, but those are the connections. The other cool feature with these is here in the ribbon in the Dataverse Accelerator app, there's this button when you highlight a plugin called Copy Code Snippet. And so when we hit that, and let me just drag a notepad up here, you can see that gives us the plugin operation that we need in our app. So it's that's really useful. If you've got one with just grab one with input parameters, and I'll just grab the notepad back. You can see that it even has my input parameters, and I just come here and I update these values in the Canvas app that I'm working in, and that makes it really easy to implement these in an app that I'm working in. So those are the instant plugins. Let's move on to the automated ones. So again, these are the ones, this works the same way an automated Cloudflow would in Power Automate. They're triggered by an event in Dataverse. And so the one that I'm going to show you, I've got several of these, but let's go into this one. And so this is calling multiple connections when we create a row. And so when you go to create these, so again, you specify a name, you specify the table that it's going to run on, and then you specify whether this runs on a create, update, or delete, and then your PowerFx expression. And then down here, you specify whether it runs pre or post operation and the solution that you want this to go in. So you can update the solution on create. You can add once you've created it, you can add the plugin set to multiple solutions, but you can specify it on create here in the Dataverse Accelerator app, which is pretty cool. And then this is my PowerFx expression. Now I've done this as a series of patch expressions. Ideally, I would do this just as one because it's going to be updating the same record with these different with these different operations. When I tried it as a single patch expression last week, I was getting an error. So it's something I unfortunately haven't had time to get into in the last week. But ideally, you would just do this as a single one and not 5. But what this is going to do when I create the row is it's going to set the name. I would say this is probably one of the biggest out of the box uses of the automated plugins as this goes GA is as a replacement for classic workflows. So at the moment we use classic workflow to set the name column on a row when we create it in Dataverse. The automated plugins do that really well, and they let you do some really cool stuff. Like, so in this case, we can count the number of rows and say, call this is the name of our table. So call it this, and then append the number of rows to it. So this is plugin connection test 5, plugin connection test 6, so on and so forth. One thing you do need to be cognizant of is this pre and post operation when you are using these types of functions. So because this is running post operation, it's not going to count these rows until after this row has been created. So it's going to include that in the count. If you did it pre-operation, it's not going to, because it's going to run, but this row doesn't exist yet. And so you would need to have an additional PowerFx function adding a row to this count. So that's a important thing. If you're not a traditional dev, if you come from more of a functional background, that's something to bear in mind when you're working with these. And then we're going to go and just call some connections. So we're going to get a dad joke. We're going to get the weather. We're going to get a Ron Swanson quote, because why wouldn't you? And some random trivia. So let's go into the model-driven app and let's see this in action. And this runs just here. Where am I? On the PFX test table. So let's come here and let's create one of these. All right, so we'll pop in. Let's get the weather for Manchester. So I don't need to add these. When I initially built this, I had a currency conversion connector as well. That wasn't working too well for me, so I've omitted that. So we'll just input that and save. And once we save, we should get a dad joke. We should get the weather conditions in Manchester. We should get a Ron Swanson quote and a bit of random trivia. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh dear. I may not have made a big enough sacrifice to the demo gods. Try it again. Put these in just in case. Bummer. It worked last week, I swear.
It is probably raining in Manchester, Nathan, though, let's face it.
And we'll try Auckland. It's going to say dark, but yeah, I don't think I missed anything it requires. Okay, now it's not going to work for us today, unfortunately. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, so the automated plugins. So if it was working for me, we would have seen it go ahead and fill in all of these details for us. So weather, joke, all of that. So I'm not sure why that's not working, but yeah. So all right. So that's those are the automated plugins. Let's move on to Power Automate. So one of the questions that I got last year when I was showing this off to people was, can it interact with Power Automate? And for the instant plugins, you can. So you can either call them from Power Automate, or you can have them call a Cloudflow and Power Automate. And you might be saying, why on earth would you want to do that? And I'd say you're probably pushing the limits of what you would do in a production setting. Um, but let's say you had something you were going to do in Power Automate. You wanted to call it synchronously, but once it's running, it can be async. So you could use a plugin to do that synchronous call and then do what you need to do in Power Automate. Or something that I've been experimenting with recently is this idea of using Power Automate as the orchestration engine to call plugins. So let's say you need to do something that's really data intensive, something that would use a lot of API calls, web API calls, and Power Automate API runs and whatnot. You could potentially use Power Automate to be that orchestration engine and let the low-code plugins do the heavy lifting. So if we come here to the multi-plugin flow, all right, so I meant to have this open before the demo and I forgot. All right, so what this does is this flow is triggered when we add a test table row in the system, and then it's going to go and it's going to call a bunch of unbound actions. And unbound act and when you create the instant plugins in the Dataverse Accelerator app, they're basically unbound actions, which means we can access them here in Power Automate. If you created one as that was table bound, it would just be a bound action, and you would specify the table that it's going to run on. But what this is going to do is it's going to, when we add this row, it's going to add the name. So same as we tried to do with the automated one that wasn't working this morning. It's going to add the name, give us a bit of random trivia, give us weather conditions, do a bit of math for us. And once those have run, it's going to go and update this row with all these values from the plugin. So let's go ahead and get into our model-driven app and trigger this thing. So we'll come here to our test tables, and let's go ahead and add this. So these are going to be our input parameters that we're going to stick in here, and then just make sure I don't need that trigger plugin. Yes, I do. Okay. All right. So let's put some numbers in to add. Let's try and get the weather in Manchester again. And trigger plugin. All right, let's run this. We'll come over here to see if our flow is running. So you can see we've got a bit of a lag till it's triggered. Again, that's because it's an async process. Not sure why that hasn't triggered. There we go. So it's running. So you can see this is a really good illustration of the synchronous versus async in terms of Power Automate versus a plugin. A plugin, you wouldn't have that lag until the process runs. It would trigger and run. Whereas with Power Automate, it kind of picks it up when the system is available for it. This is not my morning, guys. All right, this weather. All right, so we're having weather condition. So take a look at that plugin and see what's going on. Yeah. Very strange. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. This is not my morning, but we're getting an error in the plugin. Tell you what. Let me just chop this one out, and let's try it again. All right. All right. No. Okay. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I don't know what's going on in the Dataverse Accelerator app today, but my plugins are not working for me. Let's try calling. So the other thing I was going to show you is let's try calling Power Automate from one. So let's go here to action test. And so if you wanted to call Power Automate from a plugin, so you wanted a synchronous call, but then to call Power Automate, you can use this. There's a trigger in Power Automate called when an action is performed. And again, that's what these instant plugins are. So this one's table bound. So I've specified the table and my action. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to update my row with just say that Flow updated this row and give it the time. So let me come back to my model-driven app. And it's going to update this row here. I'm just going to clear this out so we see this run. So what's going to happen once we run this is it's going to drop a sales invoice here. So you can see this one ran when we triggered this a little bit earlier. And then Power Automate is going to update the message here. So we'll go back to our Canvas app. And this is the button here. When I trigger this, it's going to trigger that to run. So let me just go ahead and click this. I think that's triggered. Yeah, so we can see that this flow has triggered. Let's come into the model-driven app. I'll just refresh. And so you can see that Power Automate updated this with the UTC timestamp, and we dropped a related row in. So this was done by the plugin, and this was done by Power Automate. So you can interact. So that's how you could use Power Automate to interact with these if you needed to. All right, so just conscious that we don't have a lot of time left. So let me quickly show you this working with the CLI, and then I'll show you some of the new stuff that's just come out. So this is the command line interface that lets you work with PowerFx. And hang on. Here we go. And this lets you run PowerFx commands in Dataverse. Now you don't have the benefit of IntelliSense when you're using PowerFX in the command line interface, but it does let you do some pretty cool things. So if we just put in, say, help, This is going to show me the PowerFx expressions that I can use. But I've got go over here. I've got one that, well, this is probably not going to work because this triggers the automated plugin that was failing for us. But this is what this would do is it's going to trigger the automated plugin because we're going to go ahead and create a test table row, put these updates on it, and then that would trigger the plugin to run. Now I think this is probably going to fail because the plugin unfortunately hasn't been cooperating with us this morning, but let's see if it happens. All right, so it's created a row. So we can come over here, come over to our model-driven app, but I don't think we are going to see. Oh, look at that. It did work for us. Okay, awesome. All right, so it's named the row. So what it did was it counted the rows, and the plugin used that count rows function to stick a name in. It's added 3 and 3 together for us. It's told us that we didn't get weather conditions for Manchester. I'm wondering if it's getting confused if there's different Manchesters. I wonder if that's the issue. But we did get some random trivia, and yeah, so the plugin did kind of run for us. It looks like that weather one's having an issue. I'm not entirely sure why. So that's how you can trigger them from the command line interface as well if you want to. All right, let's move on to some of the preview of the preview features. So as I mentioned in my LinkedIn post last night, there's been some substantial updates to the Dataverse Accelerator app. Let me just clear out this stuff and let's go. So I spun up a trial environment in the US trial region. So when you set up environments, you can choose the region. Generally speaking, the US region tends to get a lot of these new AI features first. So my tenant is in Australia. We tend to get this stuff last. My guess is you'd probably get it before we do in the UK and Europe. But I spun this up. There is a region called US Preview. And when I spun this up, let's go to the Dataverse Accelerator app. So you can see this. So I haven't made any changes to the environment other than import some plugins. Let's go here. They have made some substantial changes to the Dataverse Accelerator app. And the big thing, so you can see we've got instant and automated plugins. But the big change they've made is this plugin monitoring. This is really, really cool. So if we come in here, I get a history of my plugin runs. And so if we go here, take a look, it tells me, gives me data on when it started running, how long it took, gives me a plugin step ID and basically what it tried to do. So it gives me some really cool details about the plugin run. Where it gets really interesting is when it failed. So this is the weather one, and this failed for me yesterday. So what I did was I basically put in something ridiculous like "get me the weather for spaghetti," and obviously there is a location where you can get weather for that, as far as I know. But this gives me the message block in terms of location not found, and this is all the stuff that we tried to do, and the exception block. So you get some really rich monitoring. So I haven't done much of a deep dive in this. I just noticed this yesterday, but this is a really cool thing that is available from Microsoft in that's coming in the Dataverse Accelerator app. And again, I found this if you set up an environment in the US preview region, that's where I found this. But let's wrap up with, I'll just show you, they've got some very cool AI PowerFx functions. Now they've got AI reply, AI summarize, AI sentiment. There's a few others, but they're very powerful. They do some pretty cool things, and you do need AI builder credits to run them. But the AI sentiment will tell you whether the sentiment of the text is positive, negative, or neutral. The summarize will give you a summary of it. And then there is a AI reply one that will compose a reply to a bit of input text. So for this one, what I did was I popped in a Ron Swanson quote and composed a reply to it. So let's test this and see it in action. So what we'll get is, so what's going to happen is this connector is going to grab a Ron Swanson quote, and then the AI reply is going to compose a response to it. Now, unfortunately, we can't see what the actual quote was, but you can generally kind of get the gist of it from what the AI reply is. So let's cross our fingers and toes and see if this is going to work for me. No capacity. Yeah, I may not have enough AI builder credits. Yeah. Bummer. Okay. Yeah, I was afraid this was going to happen. So you do need AI builder credits to use these AI functions in. Let's. There's also one that translates languages for you, so you can take in a string input and then specify a language that you're translating to. Let's try this and see if it will work for us. So see if it works. No, okay. So the I do have some screenshots. So let me just quickly grab those. Okay, so this is the AI reply. So I put in a message saying, dear sir or madam, I have a complaint about the product last week. It broke. I'm not happy. And then the AI reply went and composed this reply for me in the low code plugin. So pretty cool. Again, you do need AI builder credits, and I don't have them. So that's just the formula. Super easy. These are probably some of the easier PowerFX expressions or functions that I've worked with. And then this is the one that I tried to show you just now, where we composed a reply to a Ron Swanson quote, and it went and did that. So it's gone and composed a reply based on the text that connector brought back. So that's what it looks like when you do have enough AI builder credits. All right, so that is the demo. Let me just pop back into my slides and we'll just wrap up with some tips and tricks. Where am I? All right. So when should you use a low-code plugin or a traditional plugin? So trick question, low-code plugins are not GA yet, so you really shouldn't be using them in any prod scenarios. But once they are GA, they are great when you need synchronous logic. So as we saw with Power Automate, taking kind of a minute or so to trigger when you can't wait for that, plugins are your go-to option. PowerFx expressions are great when PowerFx expressions support what your plugin is trying to do. When you don't need to filter by attribute, so this is something traditional plugins, when you get behind the scenes in the XRM toolbox, you can specify in the plugin step which column or columns on the Dataverse table trigger it. Low-code plugins don't let you do that, so you'd need to use an if statement or something to narrow down when the logic actually fires, but it will be triggered by any update on the row. They can't be sequenced, so this is something you can do with a traditional plugin, is sequence when they run. You can't do that with low-code plugins, although with Power Automate as an orchestration engine, you could do that. The more than one per table, so you can have more than one automated plugin per table. I would be careful because I have noticed that you do sometimes get some errors. And again, you don't need async logic. So traditional plugins can be made to run asynchronously as well. And that harkens back to the days when plugins were the only automation option that we had in the Power Platform. And again, so your traditional plugins, these are your only responsible choice until the low-code ones go GA, which again, I suspect is probably going to be soon. They do require pro dev support, so that you need somebody who can write C# code and compile it and maintain it. Any functionality that isn't supported by PowerFx, they let you filter by attribute and sequence them and have multiple per table, run them sync or async. And then this is one, Rob Wood pointed this out a few weeks ago. He had a really good post about the performance. The traditional plugins have better performance than the low code ones. So they are a bit more performant. You're probably not going to notice, your average user probably isn't going to notice, but if you did need to run a bunch of them, then you probably would start to notice. So if performance is an issue, you need to go with the traditional ones. Okay, so just some random tips and tricks. Be careful combining the automated plugins with other processes like Cloudflow's. If you've got an automated Cloudflow and an automated plugin, you will get failures if they disagree. The custom connectors can be fiddly. There's a bit of a party trick to adding the connector to the default solution, and then even then they don't always play nicely. Collect is what you use to create rows instead of patch defaults. Set doesn't update a row anymore. You've got to use patch, although it looks like that's possibly changing again. Concatenate doesn't always play nicely. So in plugins, you'll need to use string interpolation instead of concatenate. When you're troubleshooting, Canvas apps are your friend. The IntelliSense in Canvas apps is really good, really detailed. With is an incredibly useful expression in automated plugins when you can't do things like declare variables or input parameters like you would in an instant plugin or a Canvas app. The with expression is really valuable. When you're using output parameters in an instant plugin, you've got to declare it. So you put output parameter and then your PowerFx formula. And this is something I discovered this week. You can have multiple output parameters, but this is the format that you need. So you use your first output parameter, formula, comma, second output parameter, and so on and so forth. You do need a premium license, i.e. Dataverse, to use the Dataverse Accelerator app. Your plugin executions do contribute towards those service protection limits in Dataverse. But what's interesting is that they call IORG, they don't call the web API. So they don't consume web API calls. And as we just saw, the AI functions require AI builder credits. So do be cognizant of that. They're really powerful functions, but yeah, there is that kind of licensing snag. So that brings us to the end of our time together. Happy to open it up if anybody has any questions.
Hi, Nathan. I don't have a question as such. I just want to thank
Yep.
you for your time, your knowledge, and your
Yeah,
tip.
of course.
Especially as it's 4 a.m. in the morning where you are.
Yep. Yeah,
Which
that's
is
all right.
yeah. So you've inspired me to have I did have a look at the Accelerator app a little while ago, but work got in the normal day-to-day got in the way. So you've have inspired me to take another look. So and
Cool.
I did notice you switch off the new look of Power Automate, which I do quite a lot as well, which is fun. Thanks,
Yeah.
Nathan.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you found it helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
There's a couple of comments in the Q&A, Nathan, but they're more comments rather than questions for you to have a little look at.
Okay.
In the meantime, is there anyone else with any comments? So we are a little over. I don't mind that. If there's anyone that'd want to chip in, Franco, if you've got your mic off.
Yeah, just to echo what Bernie said there, absolutely awesome content. Do you have any idea what the timeline's looking like that we can expect this to go GA?
Yeah. Yeah, nothing official. I haven't heard anything official. I get the sense that it's going to be soon. They've made substantial progress with these. So it'll be a year this month that I think it was later in May last year when these were announced at Microsoft Build. So we're coming up on a year, and they've made substantial progress with them. So they were initially slated to go GA December last year. My personal opinion was that it wasn't ready, and we could see that they've held it off, but I think they're getting close to GA. My personal opinion is that this is probably the thing that will kill classic workflow, because that's something that's persisted for a long time, and there've been rumors of it being deprecated for a while. My gut is that this is the thing that will finally do it, because it lets us do that real-time automation in Power Platform without having to write code. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's another reason for the rumor about PowerFx coming to Power Pages as well, because that's part of our tool set, the on-demand classic workflows.
Yeah. So I think particularly with the instant ones that we can call, and then we can do we can do quite a bit more than we could with classic workflow. I mean, you could extend them with writing code, but with the PowerFx ones, we just write these Excel type expressions and we're away. So yeah.
Very cool.
Is there anyone out, Anna? I can see your mic's off. I'm not sure if there's anyone else waiting to.
No, I meant to ask about the classic workflows, but Nathan beat me to it. So yes, thank you for answering my question without asking it.
Yep, no, that's all right. And it's a controversial topic. I mean, there have been rumors of it being deprecated for, gosh, probably 5 or 6 years now. And my thinking is that this could be the thing that does it, but again, a lot of people use them, and
but from my perspective, it's fine for Microsoft to do it, but they still need to give some like migration tool. They cannot just announce like, okay, a year later it's just gonna be deprecated. They need to do something as well around that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to see what that big thing gonna be.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything in terms of that. So, but yeah, I agree that they would need to give you some kind of upgrade path to get classic workflow into something like this to make it to make it an easier transition.
I'm sure there's a super secret Microsoft project of the most clever people working on something.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll give us plenty of time to transition, because they did with some of the JavaScript stuff, the execution
Yeah.
context and stuff. So I'm sure we'll get some time.
Yep. Yeah, I remember that. Gosh, 4 or 5 years ago, that was a bit of a nightmare, but we got there. Yeah.
Yeah, good for all the consulting companies. They will have customers coming in. I was like, can you do that for us, please? Yeah.
Yep. Classic consulting answer, it depends.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Nathan. And yeah, just to kind of echo Sunil's comments in the Q&A, really, I always find it interesting. I think definitely less than 50% of demos on these go to plan, but I think it's interesting for everybody to see kind of how you go back and would fix or troubleshoot what's happened. So the feedback is always more positive when there is a bit of an issue with it, honestly.
Yeah, it worked great last week at the Scottish Power Platform Group. I have no idea what's going wrong this morning, but yeah, it's again, it is a preview feature, so
yeah, it's more realistic, isn't it? That you're gonna have to go back. If life was that easy, that everything worked first time, then there'd be fewer jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Sunil. Were you coming back to say something?
No, I just wanted to say thank you. And yeah, been in these kind of situations multiple times. I know how it feels, but yeah, life goes on. We know these demos are never planned, and for the AI credits, been there, done that.
Yep. Yeah. No, I was experimenting with this a few days ago. I was like, oh, this is great, and then suddenly they stopped working. It said you don't have enough AI builder credits, and so.
That's totally understandable. Thank you
Glad
so much. By the way,
Yeah,
this is a kind of an intriguing topic, curious one. I will definitely reach out to you separately on this.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again. That was awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that today, Nathan.
No, I'm a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thanks everyone else who joined too.
Yeah.
All right.
Cheers, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.